Hey, hey, hey. Time for another Out of This World story from rSpace. You know that saying, what's done in the dark will come to light? Well, not everyone is above such universal truths. Today on rSpace, when you're underestimated by someone who thinks they're smarter than you, the payoff is oh so sweet. Caught wife's affair partner bragging about their secret, so I sent screenshots to his wife and watched as his life crumbled. Sorry if it feels like I'm rambling through this. This is all fresh, and I'm still struggling to process what my life is going to be like now. Using a throwaway because I haven't told anyone in my life about this. My wife, Claire, 32 female, and I, 34 male, have been married for 6 years. We don't have any kids, but we'd always talked about starting soon. It was always right around the corner, but we just kept waiting for the perfect time. First, we wanted to settle into our new home. Then we wanted to get used to our jobs. Then we were waiting until we had a bit more money saved up. The time never seemed right, and looking back, I think it never was going to be right. I was probably the only one who wanted kids, and she was just leading me on. There's a good chance that I'm just being paranoid now, but she's given me no real reason to trust her anymore. My wife works in sales, and a big part of her job involves socializing and networking. She's always attending lunches and social events. I can't claim to fully understand her job, but she says it's an important part of building social capital. I have no idea what that is, but apparently it's critical for her department. Most of these things were employees only, but sometimes partners were invited, and I would go along. It didn't look like real work to me, but what do I know? They'd drink together and pretend they liked each other for a while, then walk off into a corner to mutter about business for the rest of the night. I couldn't stand those events, but I just went along to be supportive. This is how I got to know a few of the people she worked with. One of those people was Gary. My first impression of the guy was that he was a tool. He was always sucking up, trying to act like he was your best friend, but in a condescending way. You know, the type of person who calls you my guy when you're barely even acquaintances. I always got weird vibes from him. I decided I don't like him about 2 minutes into our first meeting. I told him I was a roofer, and he said, "Well, that's certainly a career choice," in a way that made it clear it was one he didn't agree with. Like I said, he's pretty condescending. I usually just ignored his comments for my wife's sake. I don't like the idea of building up bad blood between her and her coworkers. But then one day, he made a comment that I just couldn't let slide. It was about a month ago at another one of their company functions. I had to leave early because I had a job the next morning, and I needed to get enough sleep. At first, I was going to leave without Claire, until Gary said, "Don't worry, I'll keep taking great care of her for you." There was something about the way he said it that ticked me off. My wife's response pissed me off even more. She called him an idiot, but it was in a joking way. That wouldn't have been that bad on its own, but she was all blushy and flirty when he said that. The first thing that came to my mind was the whole work wife, work husband thing. I'm not down for that at all. I dropped all the pleasantries from my face and voice and told him that Claire was coming home with me. It wasn't what we agreed on, and she was about to argue, but I think she saw that I wasn't in an arguing mood because she just said her goodbyes and left with me. The car ride home was uncomfortable. We didn't talk for a while, and when we did, it instantly broke down into a shouting match. She said I was just overreacting over a harmless statement. I told her that I didn't care about Gary's statement because I knew he was a massive tool. I was pissed at how she'd reacted to it. I shouldn't have had to point out how disrespectful it was for her to bat her eyelashes at another man right in front of me. It made me wonder what she got up to when I wasn't in the room. She ignored me and wouldn't stop harping on the fact that I was rude to her coworker. The argument went nowhere. Things were tense after that. I made a point of not tagging along to any of her work functions from that point on. She was a lot more tight-lipped about what went on at work, and she made an effort not to bring up Gary anymore. There was a part of me that was glad. I honestly didn't want to hear about anything to do with that guy. But another part of me was uneasy. It didn't feel like she was trying not to upset me. It felt more like she was hiding something. After a while, things kind of went back to normal. On the surface, at least. That event was burning a hole in the back of my mind. I didn't have concrete evidence of infidelity or anything. Honestly, I mostly just suspected that she had a crush on Gary. But that didn't stop me from losing my trust in her. I always imagined her flirting with him anytime she had to stay late after work, so I started keeping tabs on her. She hated it, but I started calling her more often when she was out at her work parties. Most of the time, things seemed to check out. She'd answer the call in an exasperated tone, and I'd hear the sounds of her coworkers chatting away in the background. But one day, I heard something that fueled my suspicions even further. One evening, she was out for drinks with some firm they were trying to kiss up to. Like usual, I called her and heard the typical party chatter in the back. But I caught something different this time too. "He's calling again? It's unbelievable how clueless he is." She ended the call immediately, but I'd already heard it. I felt like I'd just caught them in bed together. I realized that the outcome I'd secretly been dreading, that my wife was cheating on me with a guy I couldn't stand, had been the reality all along. I wasn't going to stand for it. The disrespect was deeper than I'd imagined. She was sleeping with this guy, and she'd had the nerve to flirt with him in front of my face. They'd been making fun of me behind my back. My first instinct was to drive right down there and break his smug face. I knew I'd take him too. I'm a solid-built guy, and he's not exactly a figure of physical fitness. I knew he wouldn't be laughing about me being a roofer at that point. Regardless, I decided to cool down and wait at home. I was so mad that I wasn't even certain Claire would be safe after I dealt with Gary, and I didn't want to do something stupid. So I waited at home, stewing in my anger. While I was replaying the call in my head, the thought hit me. They thought I was clueless? Then I'd just play clueless. When she got home, I'd pretend I hadn't noticed anything. Then I'd go through her phone when she was asleep and grab all the evidence I needed. This was definitely headed to divorce, and I'd need evidence to make sure things came up my way. Not just that, I wanted to make Gary pay. I needed to get my hands on solid proof and make him regret what he'd done. Claire came home that night, acting guilty as all hell. She got back much earlier than she normally would have, giving me the impression that she had hurried home to do damage control. She called out my name in a cautious way, like she was afraid I'd be mad at her. I was, of course, but I pretended not to be. I just asked her how the party was and how business went. She answered in an unsure voice, and within 5 minutes, she seemed convinced that I hadn't heard Gary. She'd find out soon enough. For the rest of the night, I played the part of the husband who had full trust in my wife. We had dinner and watched some TV together, but every time she glanced at her phone, I got angry again. I remember thinking it would work out on my favor if she texted him something incriminating tonight. It sucks to be right sometimes. When she finally went to bed, I waited until I could hear the soft breaths that meant she was sleeping. When I heard it, I gave it 15 minutes to make sure she was deep asleep before I went for her phone and unlocked it. I'm not an easy guy to scare, but my heart was pounding while I navigated to her messages. The future of my entire relationship hinged on whatever I was about to find in there. I was floored right from the very first message. I was right that she'd been texting him that night. She let him know how relieved she was that I hadn't overheard him. After that, they made fun of how stupid I was not to have caught on to their little secret. There was more, though. They'd been having their affair for half a year. They'd rented hotel rooms, gone on dates, and slept together. It seemed most of this had been happening on nights when she'd had events where my attendance wasn't required. I made sure I texted everything to myself. It wasn't easy going through all of those messages, not just because there were a lot of them, but because the content was disgusting. The anger was creeping back into me. I was done pretending. I shook her awake, roughly. I didn't hurt her, but she was afraid. She started to speak, but I cut her off and asked her if she had anything to say for herself. She was groggy and confused, but she sobered up real quick when she saw that I had her messages open. The first thing she did was to go on the defensive. Apparently, I was the bad guy for going through her phone behind her back. She claimed I didn't have the right to go through her phone without her permission, and that I couldn't understand things without the proper context to it. I was actually shocked at how much she seemed to believe in her own BS. I couldn't stand another second of that, so I ignored it and told her that I'd heard Gary's remark. I quoted how they'd made fun of me for being clueless and pointed out that I'd had my suspicions about them for a long time. I had more than enough reason to go through her phone. She didn't have an immediate response to that. After a minute of silence, she started getting misty-eyed and begged me to hear her out. That's when she started playing the victim card. She claimed he'd threatened to make her lose her job if she didn't go out with him, and things had escalated from there. According to her, it had all been to save her job. I didn't believe her for a second. The messages made it pretty clear that the whole thing had started with flirting, most of which came from her at first. I told her that I wasn't standing for betrayal. We were over, and I'd be filing for divorce the first thing in the morning. That's when the waterworks started. She begged me not to break up our marriage over a mistake. She insisted that she loved me and that we could still fix our marriage. I laughed. Half a year sneaking around behind my back, betraying me and mocking me with another man? That wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And now she wanted to patch things up because she was caught? What a joke. I told her to save the theatrics for someone who cared. I wasn't interested. She spent the rest of the night begging me to reconsider. When she got tired of me stonewalling her, she eventually cried herself to sleep. I was out of the house before she woke up the next morning. I had a lot of work to do, but I made sure to find some time to talk to a divorce lawyer and get the ball rolling. I'm still messed up over all of this, but getting started with the divorce has made me feel like I've got some control back in my hands. I can't wait to be free of Claire, but I'm also looking forward to making Gary pay for this. Claire, oh Claire. I didn't think it was a big deal. Yeah, okay. She was clearly upset, but not because she hurt you. Because her two-timing house of cards came crashing down. You're dodging a massive bullet here, OP. This is the universe's way of saying you can do way better than Claire. It's like ordering a steak dinner, and instead they bring you cold chicken nuggets. You deserve the steak, OP. Update. I'm happy to report that I got back at both of them in the end. The hardest part was the waiting, honestly. I wanted to strike back against Gary as soon as possible, but my lawyer managed to talk some sense into me. He let me know that I'd be putting my case in unnecessary risk. He said he aimed to get me little to no alimony, and the best way to do that would be if Claire still had a job. There was a good chance that she'd lose her job if her and Gary's affair became public knowledge at their workplace. It was hard, but I agreed to hold back. I won't bore you with the divorce details. In a nutshell, it was a divorce. Not fun, and a lot of hard feelings all around. The real miracle was that Claire didn't get alimony from me. She had a good job after all. At least, she did for now. Once the dust from the divorce had settled, I got to work on the next part of the plan. It was Gary's turn. I'd had all the screenshots ready for weeks in anticipation of this moment. You see, Gary was a married man with 2 kids. I'd always known he was married. I'd met his wife, Amy. But I was disgusted when I found out he had kids. I couldn't believe how selfish he was. He'd ruined 2 families with his actions. He hadn't thought about what this affair would do to his kids. I felt bad for the kids and their mom, but I still had to go through with my plan. It was better for them to find out who their father was sooner rather than later, and there was no way I was letting Gary get away with this. It was easy enough getting Amy's Facebook account. The rest was even easier though. I'd been living this moment in my head almost daily for the past few months, and it was just as sweet as I anticipated. I started off by introducing myself and reminding her that we'd met a few times. I didn't bother waiting for her to reply. I explained that our spouses had both lied to us and carried on an affair together for over half a year. It was only fair for her to know about it too, so she could make her own decision. I let her know that my marriage had ended over this. In less than an hour, she'd replied asking if this was true. She said she'd heard about my divorce, but she'd never heard anything about her husband being involved. I'd expected her to attack me or insist that I was trying to destroy her marriage. Instead, she was just asking me to confirm that I was telling the truth. So I did. I sent over all the screenshots I took of their conversations. I even sent over censored versions of the pictures that the 2 of them had sent to each other. She didn't reply for quite a while. There was a lot to go through there, and not just in terms of quantity. It was heavy stuff to read. I remembered how bad I'd felt when I saw those messages the first time. I felt bad for her too, but I didn't regret my actions. We both deserved people who respected us and returned the love that was offered. I didn't hear back from her until the next morning. She told me she had confronted him with the receipts and they had a huge fight. She'd kicked him out of the house and was considering divorce. I felt a bit of sick satisfaction recommending my divorce lawyer to her. He'd helped me get a fair deal out of the divorce, and it felt like a nice way to stick it to Gary. We didn't keep in touch much after that, but I heard the rest from my ex-wife. She called me the same day, furious. She called me petty and insecure for ruining Gary's relationship. I was a bit surprised at first that She would call me to defend the man she'd cheated on me with, but there was nothing I'd put below her at that point. I just told her that I couldn't sympathize with cheaters like she could. Her angry sputtering made the whole thing worth it. It only got better when she accused me of ruining his life. Gary wasn't just losing his marriage, he was losing his job too. Claire was close to tears as she told me that his wife had reported him to their company's HR department. The company had a strict no fraternization rule, and they'd launched an investigation instantly. There was a good chance that he and Claire were going to be fired any day. She started telling me about how she couldn't handle the stigma. People whispered around her. Some of her coworkers were being cold to her, and she was certain some of the clients had heard about it. She was seriously considering giving up and resigning. She asked me pretty sarcastically if I was happy now. I told her, completely serious, that I was. It wasn't my problem. I was kind of pissed to hear her whining and making herself the victim when I was the one that had been mocked and lied to. Suddenly, I wasn't enjoying hearing about how she had ruined her life. I just wanted nothing to do with her anymore. I said, "At least you can still have each other," and ended the call. It turns out they didn't still have each other. I heard from Amy later on that Gary left town after the divorce. He'd lost his marriage, his job, and his kids. I wish I could have seen the look on his smug face. That's enough about them, though. I'm moving on with my life on my own. I still have my pride and my business, and I'm going to keep building up my life without her. In the end, Gary and Claire were the ones who lost everything. They both thought they could fool around with other people's lives and walk away unscathed. They learned their lesson the hard way. You're absolutely right, OP. They learned their lesson the hard way. Losing their jobs, relationships, and reputations was entirely their doing, and it's satisfying to see justice served without you needing to stoop to their level. Even though sometimes we have to stoop, that high road isn't always as satisfying as it's cracked up to be. What do you think? And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you next time.